Mental Health Awareness Month, and I wanted to talk to you about high functioning anxiety. To be honest, I was really anxious about even filming this video because while the internet can be a place to connect, and I've had some amazing kind comments, they make my day, I also worry that this is going to come across as, I don't know, I guess when you put yourself out there, there's always the potential that someone's going to have an opinion on what you have to say and then kind of trying to debunk the things that you say. So I think it also is there's a pressure. I am a licensed professional counselor in the state of Texas, and disclaimer, any of the information that I use is for educational purposes. That's why I'm also going to talk about it in the lens of my own experience, because I think it's easier to learn through other people's stories, other people's experiences, versus giving you an exhaustive list of like, diagnosis this, diagnosis that. These are the symptoms. And while I am going to do a little bit of that in this little chat, I want to, again, kind of come from a place of just sharing my experience. I want to take you on my day, kind of show you my morning routine. I hope you guys enjoyed that little montage. Morning routines are the things that really keep me grounded, and it's a thing that I control. So I often feel, even when it's like something like this, like I knew this was coming up, I was feeling a little bit of anticipation anxiety the day before. I told myself, oh, well, maybe I won't work out, maybe I won't do this. And then I quickly said, no, you have to do these things because these are the things that are going to prepare you for sharing this. I think vulnerability can be very hard. I think we confuse vulnerability with just self-disclosure. Vulnerability is really just putting yourself out there without knowing what the outcome is going to be. And if you've experienced something like this, definitely share down below. I wanted to talk to you guys about high functioning anxiety, which is not something that a lot of people talk about, and specifically what is high functioning anxiety. I will say disclaimer, it is not an official diagnosis. It is not in the DSM-5, DSM-TR. I think that's the one now. I don't know. They've just recently updated the diagnostic manual, which is the manual that psychiatrists, psychologists, licensed counselors use to diagnose clients and patients. And so it's not necessarily an official diagnosis. I think it was more derived from like not knowing what people who struggle with this, it's like you can't really see it because on the outside you look so put together. So there really wasn't a name for it. And sometimes generalized anxiety disorder does not fit the bill. And so I kind of wanted to share that with you because a lot of people with high functioning anxiety don't seek help because they feel that it isn't bad enough to deserve treatment or care. And so we're seeing a lot of people who don't come in. A lot of these are people who have struggled with trauma, and you're seeing them more like in survival mode. And so you're seeing them utilizing achievements for a sense of self-worth. These are some of the things that I struggled with. Behaviors that you can look and be like, she might have high functioning anxiety. High functioning anxiety can look like high achiever, highly organized, detail oriented. Sometimes it could be people who constantly have planners but never use them. They might have an outgoing personality. They might be very proactive about things to a fault. They might constantly overthink and overanalyze. I'm guilty of that. Having this fear of failure and strive for perfection, that was my biggest indicator that I was struggling with high functioning anxiety, is like this need for perfection, this need to please others, difficulty saying no, the tendency to dwell on my mistakes, like often remembering shit from the past that like no one ever remembered but me about when I fell or when I did something embarrassing. And then also the nervous habits like nail biting, hair twirling, and leg shaking, things like that. I definitely have seasons where I start biting my nails. And there's seasons where I don't. I feel a lot better because I've managed my anxiety with routines and things like that. Insomnia and fatigue can also be an indicator or behavior that shows up for high anxious folks. And excessive worry and difficulty expressing emotions. Sometimes you feel trapped in your emotions. It's like so hard to even articulate them. I've had those moments where like I'm anxious and my husband's asking me like, what's going on? Like, what are you feeling? And I literally cannot put it into words. Sometimes it could be an image. Sometimes it could be just like, this is how I feel, just like jumbled words in my head and jumbled thoughts. And that's how I knew that I was struggling with this. And so I really didn't notice anything was wrong in general until 2015 when I had my first major panic attack. At least when I noticed it. And it was the most intense that I had, because I feel like as a kid I had panic attacks, but I just never really knew what they were, could tell you. And so it was in 2015 when I was a grad student to become a therapist that I felt like I knew I was exhibiting all of the symptoms, all of the signs, but I kept pushing myself. I was in a million organizations. I held titles, like I was in leadership roles. I was working 2 jobs. I had an inconsistent sleep schedule. I was not eating well. I was having 3 cups of coffee, Red Bull, just to keep going. I mean, it was bad, but at the time I was like, that's just what grad school is. Because I was doing a full-time grad school, 2 jobs, like it was intense. And it was the week after finals that I was like, ooh, I survived. But before that, I had been so anxious about like finals and getting a good grade. And I think it was like my 3rd semester in the program. And I was just like, oh, like I really want to get a 4.0, and like so I was really really hard on myself for a lot of these things, and I just didn't want to let anything go. I knew I was like, no, I could do this, like I should be able to do this. And then all of a sudden it all hit me all at once, started having heart palpitations, thought I was having a heart attack, and I didn't have anybody that I knew nearby. Like my friendships were still pretty new, and everybody kind of was like a commuter student, so I didn't really have anybody close. My mom freaked out because she was like 8 hours away from where I was doing grad school, and so that was like the most scariest moment for me, having to just literally go to the hospital. And then when I went to the hospital, because it was a college town, like the doctor was just asking me things like, are you sure you're not pregnant? Are you sure you didn't take drugs? Like things like that, which I thought was very like disrespectful to how I was feeling. Like I just immediately think that they jumped to those conclusions versus actually like allowing me to just like letting me know that I'm gonna be okay. But yeah, that was like super scary. And I remember that was the first time that I got prescribed a low dosage of Xanax, and that helped tremendously. I think they gave me like 10 or 12 pills, and I didn't feel like I had to be dependent on them. I think right after, because that was so scary for me, I knew I had to make some changes. So I dropped a lot of things. I went home for the holidays, and I was just trying to make sure that I was like really focusing on myself instead of like keep going, keep going, keep going. Again, it was like, again, for anybody looking outside, I was very high functioning. And yeah, so like I remember taking that medication, and I never went back to medication because I felt like I was good. I didn't really feel like I needed it. And most people with high functioning anxiety don't necessarily need medication. I think when it gets to the point where it becomes generalized anxiety disorder, which feels a lot more intense sometimes, we think about medication, therapy, a combination of that kind of treatment. But for me, I really just wanted to create lifestyle changes. I ended up creating some changes only to revert back, I think, in 2017 when I got my first big job, and I felt again doing the high functioning anxiety, like over people pleasing. It was my first job. I wanted to prove myself, and that led to burnout, and it was miserable. It was like completely miserable that time. And I'm only kind of giving you guys the Cliff Notes version of it, like because it was just so intense. I have the full podcast episode where I talk about my panic attack in grad school, and then when I talk about my experience burning out in my first big government job. And yeah, like that's kind of the 2 moments in my life that I really felt like were very pivotal to making all these different lifestyle changes. But I also want to be very honest that I was reverted back. Like I could see that if you do not notice when you're being a people pleaser, when your perfectionism coming in, when you're overthinking, you're overanalyzing, when you don't notice it and it keeps going, it's going to lead to burnout. It's going to lead to an anxiety attack. It's going to lead to these things, right? So we want to prevent it before it happens, or it becomes even worse and we're actually leading to an official mental health diagnosis, which could be GAD. And I think for me, the way I like to tell clients like the difference between GAD and high functioning anxiety, GAD is official diagnosis. High functioning anxiety, not official diagnosis, just kind of a way of how we describe people who are exhibiting some of these behaviors. But the primary difference is how an individual responds to anxiety. So with generalized anxiety, we tend to think of the fight or flight response. An individual who experiences GAD might try to remove themselves from an anxiety provoking situation, maybe like avoid and things like that. But with high functioning anxiety, there tends to be more of a fight response where an individual pushes themselves to work harder in order to combat that anxiety. So get it? So GAD, kind of like run away, and high functioning anxiety, we're gonna fight it. Like we're gonna try to push our hardest to overcome it. Almost like too hard where we're not even like taking a moment to see like what's going on. So that's exactly what I was experiencing. I don't know if any of you have experienced that, but that's what I was experiencing. And then one of the questions that I often get from like people who struggle with high functioning anxiety is like, do you go back to your usual tendencies? And like I said, I do. But the difference is now that I'm able to catch it before it consumes me, the routines that I have are so helpful. But a downside is that not only do we have to work with our routines, we have to make them flexible and be able to negotiate with ourselves. So one of the most important thing is like when you're finding yourself back in your usual tendencies like perfectionist, people pleaser, things like that, routines can be super helpful. But there's a but. You want to make sure that they're flexible and that you're able to negotiate with yourself about that. So often when I had high functioning anxiety and I wanted like a super like structured morning routine with like 7 steps and stuff like that, sometimes I couldn't do it. And then I would feel bad about myself, and then I wouldn't try to do it in the afternoon, like a workout, something like that. I would just be like, oh, it's gone. I was in this all or nothing mentality. And so it's just something to keep an eye out, because being able to be flexible with your routines is important. Like your routines are there so that you have something to ground yourself. But if they're not working for that season, you got to change them up. And then some other things that helped me cope was therapy. I still go to therapy. It has been super helpful for me in different seasons. This season, I'm particularly going to therapy for talking about just my recent lifestyle changes with fitness and my mindset over my body. And that has been super, super helpful, because I know if I don't have this outside guidance, I know that I'm going to try to do too much, because that's who I am. Like when I have a goal, I don't just have a goal. I literally make it my whole personality, and like to the extreme. And so that I need to make sure that I am grounded, that I'm able to do things that feel right for me, that I'm not like overdoing it. So therapy has been so helpful. And the modalities that I personally love myself as someone who has gone to therapy, and the ones I've used to, that I as a therapist use my clients, is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the go-to for anxiety, and then solution-based focus therapy, and acceptance and commitment therapy, which is ACT. If you are someone who is very self-aware, you're my self-aware queen, ACT is such a great modality to have. It focuses on compassion and really allowing yourself to fully accept the reality, not to agree with the reality, but to accept it. And maybe I should do a whole separate video on ACT, because that in itself, I actually want to get more training on it, because I really enjoyed it as a therapist and as a client. But those are the ones that I found very helpful. I also have friends who because of their anxiety, they realized that there was unresolved trauma, and I've really liked EMDR, and that's a great modality to also use. It's not something that I personally use with clients, but I definitely refer out for that. But I won't be going into detail with all of those modalities, but I'm a very action oriented person, but I'm also, there are things that don't require any action, and it's simply leaning towards self-acceptance and compassion. And that's why I love ACT and cognitive behavioral therapy as a combination for my treatment. So that has been super helpful. And then other coping skills that I still use are, again, flexible routines, lifestyle changes. I loved practicing gratitude, reflections and check-ins. That was really hard for me because part of being super high functioning is like you're go, 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 and you do not want to reflect because it's like you got to be honest with yourself. And that was scary for me too. So reflection and checking in has been such a good method for me to just heal and to allow myself time to rest, like having those check-ins, and also allowing myself to let go of goals that just like aren't impractical. Like if you have seen my other videos where I talk about the 12-week year, like I liked it, but after 8 weeks, I was already bored of my goals, and I wanted change, and I thought that was too rigid. So it's okay to change your mind. Like, repeat that. It's okay. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to change decisions. And then emphasis less on the goals and more on living, right? So for me, I have goals, but my priority is just to live my life, to just make these things part of my like lifestyle. Like fitness is part of my lifestyle. Eating well most of the time is part of my lifestyle. Like being intentional with my friendships. Those things are all important to me. But yeah, that's just kind of a little bit about my story about high functioning anxiety and what I use to cope with it. And today I have some clients, and I just uploaded a reel this morning, and now I'm gonna like record this video. That's what I do today, and then I'm gonna take thumbnail photos, which I kind of did throughout this morning. I gotta send some stuff to a client. I have a client consult, so those are all things that I have to do. And I love my journal, the weekly reset planner. This is the one I use because it has like your top 3. Let me show you. It has like your top 3 goals. And so that way I know I'm not running myself to the ground. And then I have on the side, if I have time for those, I can. But if not, I can move them to a later day. And I love that you have a habit tracker. I'm going to actually upload this footage and not start editing because I do editing on Fridays, but just continue my day. It's 9:35. I was really anxious about this video, so I'm glad it's like kind of over. I don't know if you feel that way whenever you are anxious about something. When it's over, you feel like this amount of relief. So yeah, that's kind of the relief that I have right now. And not the relief because I'm like, oh, like I hate that I'm doing this. Like, why am I doing this? But more so like I'm doing this. Like, this is hard. So I hope again you're kind in the comments, and I'm gonna continue my day, and I'll check in with you later. Hope that you take extra care for yourself, and that you, if you're struggling with high functioning anxiety, that you do seek support. And I can't wait to see you in my next video.